The book of Ezekiel begins with Ezekiel sitting possibly at a river like this, the river Kebar, with the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. Ezekiel was among the second group of people to be taken into exile by the Babylonians. But we need to try and understand how he got there. To understand the book of Ezekiel, we need to delve a little into the history of Israel and Judah to find out how they ended up in Babylon. So to understand what's going on, we need to go back in Israel's history. We know that Israel was split into two kingdoms after Solomon's death. The larger northern kingdom comprising of 10 tribes, and the smaller southern kingdom really of Judah and Jerusalem. By the year 841 BC, Assyria is the dominant force in the area. It is the superpower of the area. And Assyria, the capital city, was Nineveh. That's the same Nineveh Jonah went to. But by 841, the Assyrians were asserting their authority over the northern kingdom of Israel, that larger kingdom. They were imposing their authority. They were demanding taxes. They were demanding tribute. But within the next 100 years, or within the next 119 years, by 722 BC, that authority had extended from just being one of dominance and receiving taxation to actually conquering the land and carrying the people away. They completely removed the Israelites from that northern kingdom, and it was resettled with people from different nations. And that was really the fall of that large part of Israel, which it never ever recovered from. There never was a rehoming of the Jews into those kingdoms. And so you have Assyria dominating the northern kingdom. All of the northern kingdom, the Assyrian power and influence kept growing. And within 20 years of that northern kingdom falling, the Assyrians made it all the way to the gates of Jerusalem. Now Hezekiah was the king in Jerusalem and Judah at that time. And he was only saved from the Assyrians by the intervention of the Lord himself. An angel of the Lord came and slayed some 180,000 Assyrian soldiers, saving Hezekiah and saving Jerusalem. But that rescue was only to be short-lived. Hezekiah failed because after the Assyrians were turned back, rather than trusting in the Lord, Hezekiah tried to make deals with Egypt for his protection. Now throughout the Old Testament, when Israel looks to Egypt, that is symbolism for not trusting in the Lord. Remember, Egypt was the place where they started out life and where they ultimately were enslaved and had to be freed by the Exodus. And so it was that failure to trust in the Lord, to look to God, and instead looking to Egypt that led to Hezekiah's failure. All kingdoms and all empires, so the Assyrian Empire began to wane, and it was superseded by the Babylonians. And by the time we reach 612 to 605 BC, remember that's just over 100 years since Assyria conquered that northern kingdom of Israel in 722. By 612 to 605, so the Babylonians had become the superpower. And they had replaced the Assyrians, defeating them in battle. And the Babylonian king at this time was a man called Nabopolassar. We don't know very much about him, but we certainly know more about his son Nebuchadnezzar. In amongst this power struggle between the Babylonians and the Assyrians, Judah and Jerusalem are kind of caught in the middle of it all. They're the meat in this sandwich. And in 609, the last of the good kings of Jerusalem, King Josiah, the king who introduced so much religious reform, He set out to stop the Egyptians linking up with the Assyrians, or linking up with the Babylonians to fight the Assyrians. Unfortunately, Josiah was killed in battle. And really that ended that brief flirtation that Jerusalem had with godly kingship, godly worship, and reintroduced another period of kings who did not look to God, and ultimately the destruction of their city. 4 years after Josiah's death in 605, the Babylonians came to Jerusalem, and they came really to claim it as theirs. King Jehoiakim, he basically crumbles. He sides with the Babylonians. He agrees to give them tribute. He agrees to pay them taxes. It's history repeating itself from what happened in the northern kingdom with the Assyrians. As part of this tribute, the Babylonians carry off their first group of exiles. And among them was a man named Daniel and his 3 friends. 598, the king decided he'd had enough of this Babylonian overlordship. He decided he'd enough in paying taxes, and so he rebelled, and he was killed. And the city was crushed. Nebuchadnezzar took Ezekiel, and he replaced, the king was killed, and he was replaced, ultimately replaced by a puppet king called Zadok. And even Zadok couldn't keep his end of the bargain with the Babylonians. And so we're back at the River Kebar. Less than 30 years after the Babylonians first turned up at the gates of Jerusalem, Ezekiel is sitting there with those captive elders. They've been there for 5 years, according to the opening verses of Ezekiel. The whole book of Ezekiel becomes God's revelation to Ezekiel, the visions God gives him as to what will happen to those who are still in Jerusalem. The city has yet to be flattened. King Zadok will ignore the warnings of prophets such as Jeremiah. He will rebel against the Babylonians. His sons will be killed. He will watch his children die before his own eyes are gouged out. And the full wrath of the Babylonian Empire falls on the city. Ezekiel paints a picture of desolation and destruction. And if we want something to visualize that, imagine the scenes from films like Terminator, when the whole of humanity is wiped out by the robots. That is the scale of the destruction the city will face. But crucially, Ezekiel will also be a book of hope, a book of redemption, and a book of promise. A book that where God cries out to his people to repent and to turn back to him. A book where he promises to rebuild what has been torn down.